But I remember even like meeting one of my good friends. We were having a conversation, and literally the first time I was ever talking to him, and I said something, and I was like, well, I know I'm like kind of controversial in running because he's a runner. And he was like, I don't think we should use that word. Let's use like polarizing. And I was like, that is better. But the fact that you weren't like, no, you're not, is like pretty rough.
Joining us now, she's a professional mid-distance runner, founder of Atalanta NYC, a nonprofit that employs professional female runners to serve as mentors for young girls, and a student at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Her record-breaking high school and professional running career included becoming a 2013 World Championships finalist in the 1,500 meters, the 2014 World Junior Champion in the 3,000 meters, and the winner of the prestigious Wanamaker Mile at the Millrose Games. She shared her story of abuse as a runner for the Nike Oregon Project in a 2019 New York Times video op-ed, and has since dedicated her career to driving change in sport. She serves on the board of The Assist, a nonprofit that brings awareness, accountability, and transparency to sexual violence against athletes at all levels, and she's been on a billboard in Times Square. She loves studying Greco-Roman mythology. She prefers running without headphones, which is wild. And her new book, This Is Not About Running, hits shelves on April 28th. It's Mary Cain. That bio is longer than you are old. Hi, Mary. How are you?
Hi. And I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I'm turning 30 like in a week and a half. So we're maybe not going to be able to say that for too long.
That's very true. Congrats on the book. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, I shared the intro chapter to the book before you joined, and wow, that is one way to let folks know that the book is going to be brutally honest. The gloves will be off. Did you know you wanted that tone from the start, or did you find your voice while writing?
I think I always expected that the first chapter would be different from subsequent chapters. And I think part of it was because I've chosen to write the story from the present tense. And as a result, like there's a lot of times where it's like 12-year-old me and 14-year-old me and 16-year-old me. And I was like, like adult me is pretty angry. And I want her to be able to say her piece. And I felt in many ways that was an important place to like kind of come up front and express myself so that people understood throughout the story if there's times in which I'm sharing what I was thinking at the time. It's not to say that I agree with that or that I think that's good. It's just more to kind of set the tone that that is what a culture of abuse does to you, where it kind of like traps you into this mindset where anything that happens, you almost blame yourself, versus thinking, what is being done to me is problematic. So that first chapter is kind of meant to remind the reader that, like, do not worry. I have gone to therapy and I have a righteous anger and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, it's really powerful that way. The book kind of reads like a diary. It's short chapters in chronological order. And the first person present tense does allow for, instead of adult you looking back and making commentary about things, instead it's the you of that age reacting and responding as things happen. It's pretty powerful. A lot of media these days sort of leads people to water and then almost drinks for them. It's like, and then here's what's happening. And let me remind you again what's happening. And your book is very different. You sort of flatly say some very problematic and disturbing things that adults in your life do with very little judgment, because it comes from a place of, at that age, not really understanding the depths of the depravity that you were witness to. And that's a powerful thing to allow the reader to be like, wait, hold up. Did she just say this happened? As opposed to then saying, and the reason that's bad is this. That does mean that you have to respect the intelligence of your reader, and maybe they won't always be there with you in seeing things the way that you did or in the way that they should. I just wonder, I'm thinking about other folks who have been through this before, or maybe even intersected with you. Someone like Kara Goucher, who we've had on the show, who had her own experience. Like, as you're in this media rollout or as you were finishing the book, did you feel like you needed to write anything to how those folks maybe were misrepresented to you? Because the way that you write about her experience with Alberto Salazar maybe isn't exactly what happened. It's just what you were told by him.
100%. And there's so many moments like that. And I've since personally talked to Kara a little bit about that. Because I think Kara in particular was the most difficult person for me to write, because I felt people understanding my kind of understanding of her was really important because obviously the relationship that she had with Alberto was so horrifying. But it's easy to kind of have a hindsight bias and be like, Mary probably knew that at the time, instead of being like, no, I had this very different perspective of what their relationship probably was based on all of the things he was telling me. And I kind of have the opinion that my book will hopefully elevate opportunities for other people, and that like now I hope it encourages other people to like go back and read Kara's book if they never have, to kind of like see another woman's perspective and her viewpoints from those times. And I'm kind of always wary of being like inserting myself into other people's story and being like, this is actually what happened to her, because she's obviously done such a beautiful job of speaking for herself. And so if anything, I would hope that this kind of more passes the baton to her versus then me kind of feeling like I need to correct the record, because she's already done a really great job of that for herself.
Perfect track metaphor. There were so many moments throughout the book that I wanted to give you a hug, or I wanted to tell off an immature adult for you. It just felt like there wasn't much joy for you in running, even as a middle and high schooler, and being a track athlete, a D1 track athlete myself. Like, I got so much joy from the sport, despite how hard it could be. And I wonder how you managed to find and separate the joy that running brought you from the sadness the people in running caused you, especially when you were young.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and something that I have been getting a lot of, kind of the like, why did you run, based on reading this book? Um, and I think part of that is because I've always been someone who's like deeply process oriented, and any goals that I have just always been very internally motivated, and they're not necessarily like I'm doing this for friends, or I'm doing this for glory or attention, or like insert the outcome. It's always kind of like I really like running and I really like seeing how fast I can go, and I just think that's like fun whether or not anybody ever watches me do it. And so I think because I just always had that like self-driven curiosity, it made it so that kind of like throughout I often was able to maintain the healthy perspective of like, oh, everyone else is weird, but I'm not going to let their weirdness affect me. And obviously there's a certain point where that stopped because everyone was weird, but it's a conversation that I still have now, like even with my mom, right? Because I have kind of gotten back into running a little bit, and it's very personal, but there is kind of that question always of like, I kind of have a little bit of intrigue to see like what can I do now that I like have corrected the longstanding injury that made it so I couldn't feel my foot. And like she'll often kind of check in a way where it's like, when you throw these little thoughts of like the maybes out there, is that for you? Is that because you feel you have to? Is that because you're like any other reason other than just like your own curiosity? And I'm like, nope. If I ever got on the track again, I'd probably like wave at the kids, glare at the adults, and then leave and go like have a milkshake. So I have a very kind of like, the act of running can be separated from the sport of track and field.
Right. And like, it's fair for her to check in and say, can you do this in a way that's healthy? And, or is it possible that you'll revert to old habits or mindsets, which is very common for people who have been through traumatic incidents. I mentioned your New York Times video op-ed in which you shared your story from your pro career, but this book is really the first time you're sharing what happened to you before you even got to Nike. You struggled a lot on your high school team with unfriendly teammates and their jealous and racing-obsessed parents. In the book, you share that your team even went so far as bailing on a major national competition team race, thinking it would keep you from running in it, but you were able to run solo. That feels like such an extreme example of your teammates depriving themselves of something just to harm you. Almost an unbelievable example, but you, when you're reading the book, can see all the stories leading up to that moment. Why or how do you think things got so bad there? Instead of just the usual jealousies of a phenom, it went beyond that.
I think part of the problem was honestly a lot of the parents of kids on my team were either just kind of bluntly wannabe runners themselves, and incredibly wealthy people who were kind of used to just getting what they wanted because they could probably in some capacity like throw their name or connections or money around. And here you have this like super nerdy kid rolling up with like a freaking duck pillow pet being like, hi everybody, do you want to be my friend? I'm just like weirdly naturally talented and super hardworking. And everyone's like, can we buy her to get off the team now? Thank you so much. And so I think those two things kind of came to a head. But the truth is, like, Kirkus Reviews came out with a review this week, and I like loved their last sentence because it was something like, you know, even though this is almost like so unbelievable in ways, it's so ordinary. Because I do feel we all know the stories of like someone being at a sports game and the parents screaming at them or the other coach making a kid cry. And like, it's not that foreign to us as athletes, but honestly, people in any sort of like high performing field, like there's the kind of lore always around helicopter parents. And I think for me, I just was unlucky with the people who I was around. Because sometimes the kids who are most protected from helicopter parents are the kids who, I don't know, make it so their kids get to be national champions. But for whatever reason, I was amongst adults who were kind of bitter that I was faster than them. And then, you know, who knows what they were saying to their kids at home. And it's part of the reason I extend a lot of those kids the grace of like making their name pseudonyms so that they have kind of like the privacy to hopefully like become adults who don't pass this on to their kids. But I think that is something that like the kids' behavior, I think always is stemming from the adults.
Yeah, and I think one of the complications in a sport like distance running is some of the most successful folks are quite young. So the expectations and potential benefits of being great start much younger. So the focus on you was incredible. When you started to become nationally known for fast times, the internet, adults everywhere were talking about you. And it's the equivalent of being the star of a professional adult league, but you're a kid. And so the money, the sponsorships, the fame, the attention can come much younger, which causes people to treat you in a way that's just not appropriate for a child. And it's hard to read the way adults talked about you, insults, accusations, even threats in running forums. How do you think it impacted the way you saw the world of running and maybe even what you felt was okay or acceptable to, at such a young age, already see the way people talked about you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the good thing is that I never read any of those like horrible things written about me and thought like, I guess that's what adulthood is. Like I always read them and was like, wow, like this adult man needs therapy. But that's not to say it wouldn't still like affect me and think like, wow, people in the sport really hate me. And I honestly don't know why. But I remember even like meeting one of my good friends. We were having a conversation, and literally the first time I was ever talking to him, and I said something, and I was like, "Well, I know I'm like kind of controversial in running because he's a runner," and he was like, "I don't think we should use that word. Let's use like polarizing." And I was like, "That is better," but the fact that you weren't like, "No, you're not," is like pretty rough. But I think, you know, I understand that adults, I think because the internet has made it so that there's kind of a degree of anonymity, I think sometimes people feel more comfortable taking out their like disappointment in insert whatever out on other people. And I think I was someone who I do look back as I like watched a lot of my old interviews and stuff, who was like very young. Like I was very bubbly. I was very precocious. There was probably a stuffed animal. I was probably excited to tell you about the milkshake that I had. I was never acting like an adult. Like I wasn't rolling up to these interviews in ways that it's like you could ever have confused yourself. Let's put it that way. Like it was pretty obvious how young I was. And I say that because I think that's so often a defense we kind of see in society where it's like something will happen and, you know, the adults in the room will be like, oh, they were 6 feet tall. I thought they were a grown man. And you're like, no, you didn't. That kid was a freaking kid and you made that choice to talk to them in that way. And I think we've just kind of normalize this idea that as soon as you're on the internet in any capacity, you're fair game to talk about cruelly. And I just find that so odd and so sad, and I think we can do better.
Yeah. I mean, I've been through a ton of it from being a woman in a male dominated field and on ESPN for years. And it took me a long time to stop making it about myself and to flip it and say, not even I'm angry at these people, but I'm sad for them. The reason that you behave that way is a deep dissatisfaction with something going on with yourself. I hope you get better. I hope you get healed, because there is literally no reason to behave in this way to me because you disagree with my opinion on something, or even more often, just because I exist, which really feels like what was happening to you. It wasn't even I'm jealous or mad that she's so fast. It's like I don't want her to be here. And so my response is to lash out in a way that's completely unrelated to anything she has said or done. And I think, you had to learn that younger than most people, because you weren't an overnight success, but you started to break through in a way that was, you didn't have time to slowly adjust. It was just all of a sudden, everybody knows this name in this time. And you also had to learn about a business that's essentially one for adults, but started to involve you very young. And one of the things you write about in the book is these hot girl contracts. I've talked about this plaguing women's sports for decades, but I've also dealt with it in my own industry. And I wonder if you can share first what those are, and then how it impacted you to know immediately as you entered this field, it's not all about the running.
Yeah, I think that was one of those topics that I was like, every single woman attached to sport or in so many industries is immediately going to be like, yes. And yet, it was probably actually the scariest thing for me to write about, because I think so often there is this kind of culture, I think, right now in women's sport, that if you say literally anything negative kind of about like women tangentially, then it's kind of this, oh my God, like you're bad. It's like if you name somebody for like being really mean to you, it's like you're somehow therefore not supporting other women, instead of being like, well, this woman hit me. Like, I think that's pretty bad. In sports marketing, the people who are controlling contracts are pretty much all men. Most of them have like a token woman who they like sexually harass, or at least they did back in my day, which was, like 2 seconds ago. And otherwise, it's like all these dudes who like control who's actually getting paid. And there was the like not so, quiet secret, because at least at Nike, they would talk very explicitly about this, that like some of the people who they were like, quote unquote, paying to be professional female athletes, they were just signing because they were hot. And that was always very difficult to kind of understand in my mind, partly because then the standards that were being used against me when there was talks of like having a pay cut or getting terminated or anything, where it was this kind of like machismo, like it's just a business, you're just not fast. But there's kind of this undercurrent of like, you've explicitly said you only sign this woman because she posts like countless, photos in her sports bra, and you just kind of want her around. And she's slower than I am, but you're cutting me because I'm slow. Like, clearly you don't think I'm attractive in that sort of way. And I talk in my memoir a little bit about like the idea of jealousy and how like jealousy is normal. And so of course, in these situations, I think where people get defensive is they're like, oh, like Mary's mad at this other woman just because she was hot. And I'm like, no, no, no. If that's how that woman's making money, that in some ways good for her, right? Like she can choose what she wants to do. But the problem is it really a choice for women? Are we really being empowered as women if we intellectually understand that if I go on Instagram right now and I start posting photos of me every single day in a sports bra, I am going to get more followers and therefore I'm going to make more money? There's a certain point where I'm kind of like, is that choice? Or are we feeding into a system where it's men controlling money and we're just playing the game that they want us to play?
Yeah, I've always said, don't hate the player, hate the game. I try not to hold it against women if they're trying to operate and succeed in a system that was built to wrong them. I hold it against the system and try to fix the system. But I also think there is this fine line, and sometimes we might even not judge it correctly, but I always look at folks and say, I feel like that woman is empowered, and her sexuality and her control of herself and her body makes me feel good, versus I feel like that woman is being exploited. And the way she's behaving doesn't make me feel like she's in control of it. And that fine line is very difficult. But I think my day, which is a lot more than 2 seconds ago, there was a lot more exploitation. And now there's a lot more empowerment. And when I see a woman or a campaign that feels wrong, I go, no, no, we're not doing this anymore. You can still have your hot girl, but you have to present her in a way that feels good to women, not in this way anymore. And the fact that we push back on that so often now is progress from what it used to be. But yeah, I mean, the problem is still there, that it's not really so much a choice as it is just choosing to make less money and retain your integrity if that's not your jam. Or, go on OnlyFans and sell your farts or something, whatever anyone wants to do to make it through. I think I read the book and saw and understood why you had so much trouble trusting people. Mostly just your parents were on your side, seeing things the way that you did, and a couple other people. But for the most part, you had a me against the world perception. But you did have this outsized amount of trust and belief in Coach Alberto Salazar and his Nike Oregon project. It was a massive privilege and an honor to be invited to join, to be a part of his team, to be trained by him. You even skipped the NCAA system to go pro with him right after high school, which I think speaks to the legend of Alberto, right? The aura that he had in the running world made him someone that you saw as outside of maybe the trepidation you had around other folks in the running world. When you joined, what was the future you imagined for yourself?
Yeah, I think when I signed with Alberto, I really saw my career as being essentially what Galen's was, in so much as it was going to be this like lifelong partnership, where, you start as a high schooler and, I write a little bit about this in the book, but like Galen and Alberto's relationship was
Galen Rupp.
Yes, Galen Rupp. It was really boundaryless in so much as like where coaching started and ended versus someone who would like low key break into your house and randomly just be there was murky because it was an all the time thing. And I'll always remember one time Galen saying to me, like, I'm so grateful Alberto took you on because now he's like off my back a little bit more. And I was like, if this is off your back a little bit more, then oh my gosh, what was more? But I say all of that because and it's sad looking back because now I find it all so creepy. But at the time I thought like, wow, this is like a family. Like this is somebody who will really like actually care about you and like want to be involved in your life. And I think I now look back on those relationships and I'm like, no, he kind of said a lot of like mean things about Galen's wife, and he made a lot of really inappropriate comments. And there's a lot of ways where I'm like, I don't know, did you really love him as a person outside of running? But at least the naivete that I brought into the relationship, having just had such a horrible like high school experience, made me like romanticize the idea of like team and family as a team. And I think we, kind of sell that to kids as like part of the joy of sports is like, you're going to have family. And it's like, as soon as there's any drama or any issues, we're kind of unequipped to deal with it, let alone when it becomes like my relationship with Alberto.
Yeah. And I think to the point of like his aura, you accept behavior that somewhere in your core, is wrong, because bigger than that is this belief and trust in someone who has proven success and who it's supposed to be an honor to be led by. And watching you lose faith in yourself and be gaslit enough to no longer trust yourself was really hard. At a certain point you're training with him, he convinces you need to lose weight. He encourages birth control, diuretics, crazy calorie counting. You become underfueled, overtrained. You start crying all the time at practice. Before then you seem so strong and sure of things. Throughout the book, you talk about your stance on never doping, your ability to be brave in the face of disrespectful adults, even when you're just a kid. But in that moment, you start crashing out. And at any point before the full departure from his team, did you doubt him instead of yourself? Or did it take a full removal from the situation to have enough perspective to say, wait, that was not about me?
Yeah, I think it really ultimately took a full removal, because I think any time that I started to feel doubt, he honestly did a pretty good job of course correcting. So like, for example, the only thing that made me almost not go pro was Alberto kind of like announced that he was going to take on a Russian athlete who had failed a doping test named Anna Almanova, and also take on Shannon Robery, who, like, I had teammates who had been teammates with before and were like, I never want to train with this woman again. She's a horrible teammate. She's really mean. Like, these people are telling me like all sorts of stuff that's making me be like, we have this like great thing going here. I've had bad teammates before. Like, I don't want to train with a doper. I don't want to train with a woman who's mean. Like, this feels like kind of like no-brainer situations. And I think I was so upset with Alberto for honestly bringing both of them on. But at least with Anna Almanova, when they ended up like sending her back to Russia because they like learned months before about like the Russian doping scandal, there was kind of this like acknowledgement. There was a pseudo apology of like, you were right. And I think he handled that lunch where we had this conversation so well in my mind that I was like, okay, I was starting to doubt you. I was starting to question if you cared about like drugs, honestly. And I doubted all of my teammates about like their kind of priority of clean sport. But Alberto at least kind of like rebranded it in a way that was very like, oh, you're so smart, Mary. Like, you clock this. Like, thank you. You were looking out for us. And so then I was like, oh my gosh, Alberto loves me again.
Master manipulator.
Master manipulator. He was really good at doing that. And I think he was very good at like seeing the moments that I was starting to slip and pull me back. And it was the same thing even like during the year that I was falling apart. Like, there would be these moments where even though it was like 90% negative, there would be that 10% of like, oh my God, you look amazing today. Wow. This is what you're gonna like. This is when you're gonna be great. So I think having that kind of carrot made it so that like with Alberto specifically, it wasn't until the USADA piece came out that I actually really was like, oh geez, I need to rewire things. That's not true though for anyone else. For pretty much all of my teammates, for pretty much all of the other coaches, I was like, what the heck is wrong with you guys? Like, you're never giving me that, like, you're never pulling me back up. And I remember even when kind of like before I left the Oregon Project, I like said to Alberto pretty explicitly, like, I'm only still here because of you. Because I think in my mind, I was like, I think a lot of these other people are potentially interested in doing drugs, but Alberto doesn't know that. Like, I had this like he was the last like thread.
Yeah. And I think that's very common in situations where someone has been groomed, especially from a very young age. And that's part of the gaslighting. That's part of the manipulation, is to make sure that that person is the shining light and they are right and they are good and you are failing them. And I want to get to the ban, but quickly, I do want to ask because, at the lowest point of this training, you have suicidal thoughts, you're cutting yourself, you're breaking down all the time in practice, you've got broken bones, you didn't have your period for 3 years. Alberto is taking you to doctors, not letting you see results, telling you things are fine, even though you don't feel that way. You finally go to another doctor outside of Alberto's purview. You realize you have a serious injury, not just the shin splints that he's forcing you to train through. You go home. Even after you get home, you realize that you have serious bone issues, that you have really damaged your body. This, red S, relative energy deficiency in sport, which is what we now understand is very common in a lot of sports, but particularly distance running, where you're overtraining and you're underfueled. This idea that getting smaller and smaller will help until your whole body falls apart and then you can't run or walk. You have all of this going on. And now that you're out of Alberto's world and you realize that what was going on there was wrong, how validating was the ban? Not just what was happening to me was wrong, but what he was doing and who he was wrong. That must have been just an incredible weight off your shoulders and a redirecting and rewiring of your brain of the way you saw everything that had happened.
I don't know. I don't think the anti-doping ban felt that way. I think the anti-doping ban I'm grateful for because it helped me like start to realize things were bad, and it's why I did the New York Times piece, and it's why like everything precipitated. So I think that was kind of like a super positive reaction. And then I think the safe sport life ban was incredibly impactful. But I think it was actually, I think that was one of the saddest like days that I've had in the years post the New York Times piece coming out was the day that I read the Safe Sport report, because I did not know that there were like accusations from Kara of sexual assault by Alberto. And it was so deeply lonely to like read that post. Like it was like this whole document that, you know, those of us who were involved were sent. It was literally just like crying on a bathroom floor. And as I was reading it, like the whole time I was like, I didn't know this. And I had told the Safe Sport reporters like so many different things. And admittedly, like there's a lot of stories that are not in this book. And I think if anything, I actually didn't feel particularly believed initially, because the way the report was, it was clear that they had interviewed like almost all of my past teammates, who just kind of denied most of my allegations. Like I think a few of them were like a little scared and didn't feel comfortable lying that much. But my specific like claims were thrown out initially. And I think part of it in retrospect, in talking to the center, was they were just like Kara's claims they just kind of focused on, because they ended up throwing out the other athletes' claims who had like insanely powerful claims. So the whole thing was kind of just, I think, really fumbled by Safe Sport. But I think it's taken time for me to feel empowered by that specific document. And I think that's very normal. I think it's in the same way that almost any, you know, judicial, legal enforcement thing is. I always kind of warn people who are going through the process that, like, even if you kind of quote unquote win, you're not going to feel very good afterwards, because it never negates what happened. And it's actually usually the other person just screaming and having a bunch of other people scream that you're a liar, you're a liar, you're a liar. And even though you know you're not, that's not like the most empowering thing to go through, even if some people, you know, agree with you. So I think to me, the Safe Sport thing was actually more validating, because I was like, we have two other women who are like, I also went through something. And then that ultimately at least sent me down a path to be able to do like a different type of therapy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of shame and self-blame that comes, even if logically you know that that's not true. That is so internalized deep within you over the course of the time that it's going on, that by the time you get out of it, you still have to process that much longer than maybe that ruling will do for you. And then the ruling brings more attention and more doubters and more people's opinions and all of that as well. So that isn't very enjoyable. I'm glad that you feel like you've gotten to a point where some of that weight is off. But yeah, you're right. It takes time. It's not an instant validation. You know, you mentioned earlier that there's a part in the book when you write about like jealousy and the feelings that you have and your control of them. And I have to say, I'm like it's a really meaningful part to me, because I think a lot about people not giving themselves time for self-reflection, for meditation, learning how to self-regulate and control reactions. And you write about that, and you write about how you understand feeling jealous or feeling angry, but the goal is to not be mad at the people who cause those emotions in you, but to understand why you're feeling them, gain control of them, decide how you want to react to them, which is such a powerful thing. And it feels like you have gone through a lot of therapy to understand yourself and to be able to see your story differently than maybe as something you're a victim of, but rather as something who made you into who you are today. And I want to know who you are, because you're not Mary Cain, phenom child runner. You are potentially future Mary Cain, Dr. Mary Cain, but who are you? What do you want people to think about you now, having read this book and knowing your story?
I think I want to be known as someone who's deeply honest. And I think sort of tragically, that kind of right now in today's society, I think equates to courageous. And I only say tragically because I think there should be a standard where we're all deeply honest, instead of it being like, wow, how were you so brave to like speak truth? But I think the reason that it is considered brave is because, you know, there's like a lot of people who I name in this book, and there are a lot of people who are not happy that they are named in this book. And rather than reflecting, maybe I should have behaved differently, there's more of a like, you know, tendency, and this is true for a lot of people, to try to pick out any little thing and be like, you said this happened on a Tuesday, it happened on a Wednesday, like you're a lying. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. I'm not scared of you, bully, anymore. But I think there is this kind of standard in which victims are held to like this perfection standard. And a lot of it has to do with like legal stuff where like lawyers are horrible and they try to, gaslight people all the time. And I think I am just at a place in my life where I'm kind of back to my like inner child, where I'm just like a deeply confident, self-competent person. And so I'm in a privileged position where like I can just be honest, because when I get the angry emails, yes, is it like emotionally really frying? And yes, do I need to go to therapy so I can like handle that? Of course. But it's also something that like I can handle, partly because I'm not really ever going to be in that world in the same way. Like, even if I ever run again, I have no interest in playing in that sand pit, because I don't think it's actually changed that much. Like, based on all of the things that I have, like, honestly even had to deal with in like the launch of this book and just all the random pettiness, you're just kind of like, I kind of like medicine. So I kind of like the fact that it's going to be future Dr. Cain.
Yeah, being a doctor is way easier.
Exactly. But I think part of the thing about medicine is at its core, it's a field that is built to care for others. And I think so often people in sport, like, meaning particularly people who are like in the professional side of this, I'm not talking about people who are like grassroots or community, like people who are really like in the professional world, kind of act like they're as important as a doctor. And I'm like, you're not helping anyone. Like, you're kind of high key just like running around and seeing how fast you can go and then acting like it's the end of the world. And I'm guilty as anyone of doing that. But I think that kind of like meaningless pursuit only means something if you make it mean something. So it like only means something if then you're like standing up and being like, let's talk about healthy sport. Let's talk about ending abuse. Let's talk about empowering women. Like, insert whatever the thing is that has meaning. And so I hope, I will be remembered in some ways as someone who had influence, not as an influencer.
Yeah, I love that. Last question for you. What does running look like for you now? I know you switched national allegiances from the US to Ireland, but like as far as the future or competition or just finding joy in it, what does it look like?
Yeah, it's been really fun over the course of the last year. I think I finally kind of just sat down with myself and was like, okay, I want to be physically in a position that if I want to try, I can. And I think I've been doing like all the PT, I've been doing all of the even just kind of like therapy work to be in a position where like I go out and run, half the week, I cross train half the week. And like, I'm by no means deciding to do anything yet. Like, next year I'm going to be in clerkships and I'm going to be like in the hospital running around all the time. But I kind of just like the idea of like getting my body just like truly healthy again. And then anything from there, cool. And maybe that's just I continue to do exactly what I'm doing. I'm sure there's going to be periods in my life where it's a heck of a lot less than I'm doing right now. But if one day I kind of am like, like I can represent Ireland, then like the options open, but it will always be, that will always be a new chapter that will not be related to this chapter before.
Is it Ireland because you don't want to represent the US, or what was the change?
I had enough instances where I didn't feel, and I was told essentially that there was no guarantee that there would be protection against people who had threatened me in different capacities. And that's really disheartening to hear from, your national organization, that it's not equipped to help you, partly based on the sponsor that they have. And so I just felt at the time that I made the change, kind of like, I don't know if I'm ever going to do anything, but I kind of like the idea of knowing that it's a choice. Like, if I choose not to, it's because I chose not to and was just like having a blast in medicine and like didn't want to take a step out year. But if I choose to, I'd love to do it with people who, I don't know, just like never mistreated me and want me there and want to protect me and the truth is, like, a lot of USA track and field are the same cast of characters who would just like see me walk off into a room with Alberto alone and like not really blink an eye. Um, and so I think I respect myself and I respect my safety too much not to be like, oh my gosh, I'm like really proudly Irish and I already have citizenship. So like, why not have some joy in life?
Yeah, it makes sense. I just love at every turn how you're taking control of your story, your truth, your narrative, your perspective. It's a really powerful thing to do after what happened to you. And the book is really fantastic. And I hope you have great success with it. So thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.